welcome to Conscious Curiosities, where we unlock the wisdom of the universe that lies within us. I'm your host, Maria Luz, an astrologer, certified hypnotist, and psychic medium. Today's episode is Astrological Houses. I couldn't even think of a catchy title for this because it's a little complicated. So I am leaving the title at least basic. And what we'll do is go through the significations of each of the 12 astrological houses. And I'll give an introduction because some of you who are newer might not even know what this concept is. So I'll give a little intro and then we will go through each house, and I pulled a lot of examples from the interwebs so we could have some celebrity examples as well as just some from my own life, so I could speak firsthand about some of these things. When I explain the building blocks of the language of astrology to someone who knows only their sun sign, I tell them to imagine a theatrical production or, a play or a musical or something like that. And in that analogy, the planets would be the actors, the signs would be the costumes specific to the role, and the houses are the different sets which represent where the action happens. And of course, this is a simplification. As you've probably already picked up, astrology is very nuanced and complicated. And in my opinion, that's why it's so accurate, because it reflects something that is very nuanced and complicated. It reflects our lives and how we fit into the universe. So this analogy about the theatrical production, it is just an easier way to remember for most people. So I think it's a good place to begin. And another way to think about this more abstractly may be to differentiate between motivation and behavior. Or as astrologer Stephen Forrest puts it, signs are being and houses are doing, while the planets rule a sign. And the more you practice thinking along these lines, the more the archetypes of the energies will come to life. My first astrology teacher described it as learning first words, then being able to string them together in a sentence, and finally into paragraphs. As I have plowed through the planets really in this podcast with the episodes that came before this one, I also sprinkled in some information about the signs because of the fact that each sign has a planetary ruler. And then I thought, okay, it'll be helpful to discuss houses next. And I think this because this knowledge will really empower you to take any weekly astrology forecast and determine how and to what degree the energy that astrologer is describing, how that will impact you personally. Because if you have your birth chart and they all show you these different houses, they show you where your natal planets are placed in the houses, they show you the signs that are on the houses. You simply match up the signs that they're talking about in the forecast with where those signs are in your chart. So it's super empowering to know once you've done that, well, what does it mean? And what does it mean is what the signification of where it lands in terms of the house on your birth chart. So if you haven't done so yet, maybe listen to episode 1, which will get you started on your birth chart. I basically give you a step-by-step process there, including some instructions for how to find your free birth chart online. And as I discuss each house in this episode, you'd want to look at your birth chart and then see which sign of the 12 is on the cusp of that house, and then which planets, if any, because some houses will likely be empty, which planets are in that house. And then you'll be able to listen back to the various planet episodes I did to understand how the behavior that is described by the house manifests for you based upon your birth chart. And knowing which sign the planets are in currently in the sky will allow you to then see which of your houses they're transiting through. And there is a concept that both complicates and simplifies these things. And that is, if you think of the zodiac wheel as a progression from the first house to the 12th, and really from the birth in a human body to returning to source. And along this train of thought, the first house then corresponds to Aries and the 12th house with Pisces. And the order in between is the same as the zodiacal seasons. So Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, etc. And so you can see how it both simplifies, because A is like B, like Aries is like the first house. Yet I just said that the signs are the being and the houses are the doing, and that A is not like B. So I just have to stress that I'm giving a basic overview of the houses in this episode. And if you want in-depth coverage, I just learned that the Astrology podcast is doing a series on the houses. And Chris Brennan, the host, is amazing and a true Scorpio, meaning he goes deep. And his part 1 episode on the first house is over 3 hours long. And I promise you that this episode will not be that long, but I think it may end up running quite a bit longer than my usual episodes. But there's no choice than to simply begin somewhere. So I promise that after you have some practice, this language of astrology will just click into place, like your high school French classes led you to eventually show off and ask your friends, "Ça va?" instead of like, "How's it going?" And and I think the other thing, I may spend a little more time in some houses and a little less in others. For the most part, it's not because they have different levels of importance, although I have to say, first off, the first house is extremely important, and I'll explain why. But it's just because some I was able to find good examples and some not. So if you have specific questions about a house that maybe I skated over, you are welcome to email me. So the first house, this is determined by identifying the sign that was on the eastern horizon at the time and location of your birth. And this house represents the self on the most basic level. So think me, Tarzan, you, Jane. And because of its association with the self, its importance is elevated over perhaps any other house. And the natural association, as I mentioned, by sign is Aries. Aries is ruled by Mars. But note that your rising sign is the one which you will want to keep in mind when I describe the first house. So most likely you will have a different sign, not Aries, as your first house cusp or your rising sign. And this is also an angle called the ascendant. And I'll explain a little bit more when we get to some of the other houses. about angles. So, first house represents the physical self as well as characteristics about you. So, you can see already how the concept of being, the signs, versus doing, the houses, is rapidly blurring. It's easier to explain by using the example of a transiting planet. So, most people know that one of the things Mars is associated with is violence. So it could be that when Mars is transiting your first house, there is a chance you will experience violence. But Mars can also represent the drive to act upon your desires. So you could experience that. Or those things could be the same event if you are the one exhibiting the violence based upon your desire to do so. But please don't. And if there are planets in your first house of your birth chart, the associations of those planets will likely just be a part of you that you need to understand about yourself as a person. And an example is that I have Neptune in my first house, and I've definitely had Neptune-related experiences, such as having a vivid imagination, having a tendency toward escapism, and alcohol in specific, which is also associated with Neptune very much so. And also sleep-related issues, which are also a Neptune thing. And those things have just been intrinsic to me. So in the first house, you're essentially born, and now you must have food, shelter, valuables to secure. And these are all second house themes. And this house is related to Taurus and Venus. But remember, your sign and planets that are in your particular second house in your birth chart will play in this sandbox as well with those themes. And the singer Rihanna has Taurus at the cusp of her second house, and she also has the part of fortune in this house. And she has a net worth of $1.4 billion and is the richest woman musician in the world. And I thought this was so perfect on many levels. Taurus rules the throat, so singing. Venus is also associated with musicianship. And of course, both of those, Taurus and Venus, can make for an energy that's very adept with money. And Rihanna's beauty line, I think it's called Fenty, is this huge contributor to her net worth. So I could see that, she very wisely looked at sources other than her singing to establish this security for herself. Of course, she's immensely talented as well. And moving on to the third house, if we're thinking about this again as a wheel of life, you now need to find some help and some company so as not to be so lonely. And communication, siblings, short travel, neighborhoods, and early education reside in this house. I just had to step away to cough, and I'm having to do that quite a bit. I guess I'm still getting over COVID. So if it sounds choppy, it's because I'm stopping and starting the recording. Okay, so back to the third house. It is naturally related to Gemini and its ruler Mercury. And another example from me, Pluto has been transiting through my third house. And during this time, I have definitely experienced power and transformation, which are associated with Pluto. And I started a podcast, a YouTube channel, and 2 Substack. Well, actually, three Substacks. So I'm writing a lot, and all of those things are, communication and Mercury related. Additionally, my relationship with my siblings has also really transformed. And again, siblings are third house. And that's been my current experience with Pluto. And the fourth house, this is associated with home, family of origin, ancestors, and a parent. It gets a little complicated, but often it's the one responsible for raising you. And this house is associated with Cancer and with the moon. And an example would be if you had Sagittarius on the cusp of your fourth house and your family of origin traveled often, or you came from a long line of adventurers, as exploration and travel are associated with Sagittarius. And the architect, Frank Lloyd Wright, had Jupiter and Chiron in Pisces in the fourth house. And his designs meant to eliminate this separation between the home structure and its natural environment, which is a very Piscean and spiritual way of going about architecture, which up until that point had been very utilitarian, or on the flip side, really showboaty in the West. And so he brought these elements that were different from what people had thought about as home. Then the fifth house is naturally associated with the sun and with Leo. So it has these sunny type of feelings in it, like fun, children, creativity, self-expression, romanticism. And if, for example, you have the sun in this house, these areas will be prominent throughout your life. Although the expression may change, of course, as you change from a child to an adult. And my example here is the brilliant actor and comedian Robin Williams, who was lost to suicide, which was attributed to Lewy body dementia, a neurological disease. He had Jupiter in Aries in the fifth house of his birth chart, and he was obviously gifted with those areas that I mentioned, creativity and self-expression, etc. And also being in Aries, he was unafraid to really charge ahead into roles in comedy pieces. And just, if you haven't seen Mrs. Doubtfire, you have to watch it. I think it's one of the best movies and performances ever. That's amazing. So, sixth house. This is the area where you experience your daily behaviors. Thus, it encompasses things like health, the tasks that make up your everyday work, how you provide service to others, and things that you can mentor or need mentoring in. And this house is associated with Virgo and its ruler Mercury, although some are finding maybe a closer association with the asteroid Chiron as well. So keep that in mind. I'm definitely finding that to be true. And a personal example here is that my moon is in the sixth house. So in order to feel emotionally at home, which is a prominent moon theme, I really need to do things which keep my body healthy on a daily basis, like exercise and learning about nutrition and well-being. I am super consistent about those things, which is definitely a sixth house thing. And I am not because I want to look a certain way or because it's part of my religion or something. It's because it makes me feel like myself, which is a very moon type of thing. So you could transfer that idea of your moon to whichever house yours lives in to see under what circumstances you feel most emotionally at home. And I didn't say comfortable. I said at home because some moon placements they're not super comfortable, and you may you may need to work with some of the other components of your chart if that's the case. The seventh house. This contains how we learn lessons through close personal relationships and is associated with Venus and Libra. And take the example of Scorpio at the cusp of the seventh house. And, note that this is one of those angles I mentioned in the first house that have a formal designation. And the cusp of the seventh house is called the descendant. The other three angles are the ascendant, which was the cusp of the first house, and then the IC, which was the cusp of the fourth house, and the MC, which is the cusp of the 10th house. And I won't go into that here, but probably will in a future episode. And back to the example. So Scorpio energy doesn't F around. It is not going to go in for superficial relationships. It craves intimacy in every way. And you might contrast it with its polarity, Taurus. If you had Taurus on the descendant, where, the primary point of these personal close relationships would be to establish security. And of course, with these examples, with relationships, your Mars, your Venus, your moon, those would really also play significant roles in what you seek out, more the Mars thing and the moon, and what you attract, which would be the Venus, and then the why. Why are you seeking out those types of people? And that is more your moon. And then the eighth house. This house contains all the things that many cultures for ages have considered taboo: sex, death, and other people's stuff that we inherit or otherwise acquire, whether legitimately or not. And for anyone out there freaking out because your sun or your moon or both are in this house, try not to. However, just know that your soul wanted to explore lessons in these challenging areas. So you will very likely face these themes as a participant or maybe a spectator or maybe a creative. And one example is the queen of mystery writers, Agatha Christie. She had her sun in the eighth house. And while she actually did have most of these themes actually in her life, and I highly recommend her autobiography. It's very, very good. And I also read a biography, I think it was by Lucy Worsley, that was pretty good as well. So anyway, these themes also manifested in her writing, obviously, about these taboo topics. And with her son, being the conscious purpose, it did become her main focus for her life and what she was known for. So the ninth house. Think Jupiter and Sagittarius for this house. Things like travel, religion, law, expanding horizons via spirituality and higher education. And the civil rights leader, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., had his sun in the ninth house in Capricorn. And he, of course, was a Baptist minister. And he also earned bachelor's degrees in sociology and divinity, as well as a PhD in systematic theology. So he incorporated almost all of those themes. And the 10th house, this house is all about one's public persona, such as the career, the reputation, the legacy that you leave. And the 10th house is associated with Capricorn and its ruler Saturn. And if you happen to have Saturn in the 10th house, or even when you experience Saturn transiting through your 10th house, these themes will be especially significant in your life. And I have my sun in the 10th house, and this has made for a life with a lot of focus on career. But I can tell you, I didn't set out to have a big career, but life made it happen, which I think really displays this concept that the houses kind of do to you rather than you like being this thing on purpose. So in my example, I just married young and I was the more responsible and consistent member of that partnership. So even going, through having, 3 kids and so being pregnant 3 times and then nursing them, for like a year or more, I also had to be this career focused person by default. And it's not because I was just super into my career and wanted that to shoot off. It just happened to me. I'm over it now, by the way. It's all integrated. Okay, the 11th house. This is where the groups you associate with come into play. And as we tend to become like the people we surround ourselves with, your future lies here as well. And more, it is linked to social media by astrologers. And it's associated with Aquarius, and its rulers are Saturn in Hellenistic astrology and Uranus in more modern ways of looking at astrology. And the Facebook founder, or I guess it's Meta now, Mark Zuckerberg, has a stellium, which is a grouping of 3 or more planets in a sign or a house in Scorpio in the 11th house. And this one, I took a wild guess that his sun or moon would have to be in the 11th house. And my guess paid off. And the fact that it's in Scorpio was just like the cherry on top. And so he has his moon, Mars, and Saturn here, which makes for someone obsessed with not only fitting into groups, but creating a structure for them. And the 12th house, this represents a culmination or a return to source. And if you think about it, this is where you were before you were born, which means it encompasses other realms, hidden things, the unconscious, including secrets. And like the 8th house, this can be a heavier house for certain placements. And one theme I see often with clients, and I saw in myself, is that they can't easily access the energies of any planets placed here. They just kind of confound you or dumbfound you, I guess, either one. And they can be truly hidden or inaccessible from the individual. And one example is Barack Obama. And he has Saturn in Capricorn in his 12th house. And Saturn can represent the father, especially in Capricorn. And his father was totally elusive to him. He left his mother and Barack when he was 2 years old. And then he only visited once when Barack was 10 years old. And the other piece there about is that he has Jupiter also in the 12th house. And I'm only guessing because based on what I remember of his time in public office, I actually didn't read his like 600-page book or whatever, however long it is. But having Jupiter in the 12th house points to religion or spirituality being somewhat hidden. And the statements that I could find, again, they were elusive, but they seem to be reflected more on others' religions and spirituality rather than his own. So again, I'm just surmising here. And Barack, if you're listening and I'm wrong, please let me know. I'd love to hear from you. And oh my goodness. Okay, that was quite a journey for me. I guess it wasn't as long as I thought, but I tend to fall face first down rabbit holes and then I kind of claw my way back out. And I don't know how Chris Brennan does those hours long episodes, and he does them on video, like no less. So bow down to him. And if this episode has only whetted your appetite, please go check out his podcast, the Astrology Podcast, and his series on houses, which he just started. And you are now empowered to be consciously curious about astrological houses. If you want to work with me, please visit my website, Maria Luz Online, to look at the services I offer. I also have a lot of astrology basics info in the astrology section. If you're new, I would start with taking a look at that. I just added some descriptors in there about the different types of reading, and I would probably start with just an astrology reading to orient you to your own birth chart if you're looking for a place to start. I do have a code for 20% off. That's AstroHip. And if you're short on money but high on interest in astrology, just email me, info@marialuz.online. Please share this podcast so you can talk about it with your friends, and rate and review it so other people find it. I don't get paid or anything or make money off of this, but it is a passion of mine to empower people to this ancient language that is always relevant and helps us be more compassionate to ourselves and others. With that, I wish you a wonderful day. Bye-bye.